So I have a dilemma, and let me know if you've experienced this as well. You have a successful program, you have routines that work, tried and true activities or projects, a flawless process for preparing for concerts, and maybe you even share your ideas and resources with others. But every once in a while you get this little itch that things could be different or maybe even better. Maybe you're recognizing rapid changes happening in society and want to be more responsive. Or maybe you feel the occasional disconnect between your music program and some students. Perhaps you feel you're doing everything well, but are just wondering what else might be out there. Here's the thing. It's sometimes hard to adapt, change, update, or innovate our music programs when our tendency is to continue doing what works. But if what we're doing works, why would we seek something different? Like I said, it's a dilemma. We need to be able to recognize that the very conventions that we find helpful and that work can also limit the possibilities of what happens in our music classrooms and ensembles. Whether it's traditions, the tried and true, best practices, the things we buy or sell on TPT, or what everyone considers common sense. Reflecting on these conventions can help us be more flexible and adapt to change. So, if you have an open mind and are willing to look at what we do with a little bit of a critical lens, stay with me here for the next couple of minutes and I'll take you through a process to spot conventions in your program, figure out how they impact your program and students' learning, and then decide what to do next so you can be even more flexible, expansive, and imaginative. Alright, so let's do this. Hey everyone, I'm Evan Tobias. I'm on the Music Learning and Teaching faculty at Arizona State University, and I support music educators of all kinds, imagine possibilities for music learning and teaching, and then make those possibilities a reality. Conventions. The things in our music programs that are typical, that pretty much everyone agrees are the things we ought to be doing. To help us get some insight into the conventions of our music programs, we're going to look at some parts of Dr. Chi-Hu Loom's chapter, Shifting Landscapes in the 21st Century, Adaptability and Flexibility in General Music Teaching, from the book Teaching General Music, Approaches, Issues, and Viewpoints, edited by Carlos Abril and Brent Galt. And I'll put the link in the description. There's a lot in this chapter, so for today, I'm just focusing on a couple of themes that can help us be more flexible and adaptive. It's a great chapter, and if you read it, you will find all kinds of philosophical perspectives and great ways of thinking about music learning and teaching. Here are just some of them. But today, like I said, we're focusing in on the idea of conventions. So what are conventions in our music programs? One of the first ways to spot conventions in your program is to consider the music that you typically have students perform or listen to. So think of a genre or style of music that is pretty typical in your program. Now, think of what makes that genre or style that genre or style. And in doing this, you're already likely thinking about conventions. In his chapter, Loom explains that conventions can be read as musical vocabularies defining the boundaries of particular musical genres. Some would argue that it is essential to understand techniques necessarily rooted in specific foundational conventions to guard, appreciate, and create within the musical genre in question. Without these foundations, one would be unable to break out of the boundaries of the musical genre, let alone transcend it. So think about that for a moment. What sticks out to you here? For me, the idea of boundaries is pretty powerful.
Boundaries, okay.
And has a lot of implications for what we do in our programs and what students might experience or learn. Now think back to the genre you had in mind. Boundaries can be helpful. If you want to be able to perform or create music that sounds like the genre you had in mind, then you're going to stay somewhat within a set of boundaries. Loom highlights how conventions can define boundaries. In the chapter, Loom focuses on conventions of musical genres and how focusing on the conventions of genres can support our ability to create and perform within those genres. But Loom also invites us to imagine what our music classrooms and ensembles might be like without boundaries or conventions. As Loom states, might it be possible then to conceive of the exploration of a brave new world without ties to conventions and boundaries before it turns out to be the brave new world that Huxley created in his dystopian novel? But it might be hard to imagine a music program without conventions without first identifying those conventions. Now, sometimes conventions are so obvious or so commonplace or we're just so used to them that it's hard to spot them as conventions. For instance, in an elementary general music classroom, you might find conventions of having students learn the recorder, or you might devote time to having students practice quarter-eighth rhythms with ta-ta, ti-ti-ta. In secondary ensembles, you might find conventions of having students sit with their like instruments, or you might devote time to rehearsing music to perform for people at a concert.
So I'll be attending your concert.
So yeah, these are really obvious and things that we all tend to do, but they're also conventions. Now, of course, this is just scratching the surface. So let's make this a little bit more interactive. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and if you're up to it, you can think through the conventions in your program and put them right in the comment section or somewhere else. While you're doing that, I'll put up some cute animal pics on here, and if you don't want to play along or aren't quite ready to get your critical lens on, you can skip ahead to this part of the video, and I'll take you on right to the next step. So let's do this. 20 seconds, go. Okay, that's just about 20 seconds, so let's get ready to move on. Now, we're about to move on to the next step of this process, but I want to make the point that when you have some time, go through your program and see how many conventions you can spot. You're going to find them everywhere. Conventions in the resources you use, conventions in the products people are selling you, conventions in the types of events and opportunities you make available for students, conventions in the skills or concepts that you choose to focus on, conventions in workshops and presentations. Yep. Conventions is a thing. The goal here is just to spot the conventions. Don't qualify them. Don't be judgmental. Just keep an open mind. Be aware. Just get a sense of the landscape of all the conventions that are operating in your program. Okay, so once you have a sense of the conventions in your program, you're ready to go on to the next step. You sit with them and reflect on why they are in place and why you choose to maintain these conventions over other ways of knowing and doing music. And here is where, if you are willing, you can get a little bit critical. Now, being critical doesn't mean being judgmental. It doesn't mean tearing yourself apart. It doesn't mean getting down on yourself. It just means thinking through what you're doing a little bit critically, to ask some questions. One way of dipping your toes into some critical reflection is asking yourself, why?
Why?
And it seems a little obvious, but it actually does a lot of good. Why do we, and name the convention? And here's the thing, if you're going to be thinking of this critically, don't accept because it works or because that's the way we do things. It's not that there are unacceptable answers, it's that we're really trying to dig a little deeper and think critically, think reflectively. So you want to go a little bit deeper. What you want to do is you want to keep asking why, as if you were a young person who is constantly asking why.
But why?
Why? Why? And it might feel a little awkward for a bit, but asking yourself why
But why?
over and over again is going to get you to the point where you really get at the core of why you're doing something. It's when you get to the core that you can really begin to make some decisions. Otherwise, we tend to just do what we've been doing because we're doing it.
That's the way it's always been done.
So take it to the next step and ask yourself why. I also suggest, once you've gone through this process, do it with a trusted friend or colleague, because I think the dialogue between at least two people, maybe even more, there's something about this being conversational and dialogical that I think really helps with the whole process, and also makes it a bit more interesting than you just talking to yourself. Not knocking you talking to yourself, but there's something about talking with other folks. Now, while you could stop there, it's really not going to be the most helpful, because our tendency is to make a case for why we're doing something and to support the conventions that we've always been engaging with. It really is taking it to this next step where we can begin to apply some critical lenses and think more deeply about why we're doing things, and then peel back some additional layers to really get at, okay, now that I've explained why, I'm willing to look at this from some different angles. So my suggestion, don't stop with asking why and coming up with answers so that you can feel good about the conventions you're doing. Take it to the next step. So a next step is to think about the ways conventions are situated in particular histories, cultures, and systems of power. So one way to do this is ask the question, whose histories, cultures, and ways of knowing and doing music are forwarded through this convention? And what musics and musical practices are represented by this convention. Now, this might mean you have to do a little bit of research.
Everybody wait here while I do some actual research.
And poking around to find out, well, where does this come from and why are we doing it? And what have people said about this? This is a really critical step. But my suggestion, don't stop there. Let's move on to the next step. So one possible next thing you might think about is the impact that these conventions might be having on students' engagement, their experience, and what they learn or maybe don't learn in the program.
So, what are we learning today?
In the chapter we explored earlier, Loom goes as far as saying that conventions can have a negative impact on who learners are becoming. It's not that rehearsing music or practicing ta-ta, ti-ti-ta patterns are inherently bad or harming students, but if the conventions we follow emphasize only certain ways of knowing and doing music, they can limit and constrain the way students are being musical. Loom suggests that music education often has a narrow focus on simple skills and elements, casting out many other musical experiences outside its curricular scope. So, for every minute students are practicing ta-ta, ti-ti-ta patterns, they are not exploring other ways of experiencing rhythm, groove, or flow. For every minute students are rehearsing a piece for the concert, they are not creating original music, unless they are rehearsing the thing that they've created. For every minute students are practicing part writing for an AP music theory exam, they are not exploring varied tonal systems and their relationship to cultural contexts. So what our conventions include sends particular messages to students, whether we say it out loud or not. And for those interested, we can call this the hidden curriculum. By emphasizing certain ways of knowing and doing music, we are excluding other ways of knowing and doing music. And if you're curious, we can call that the null curriculum. The point here is that we do tend to de-emphasize or exclude certain ways of knowing and doing music. And when we do that, it does send a message to students about what we value and what we don't value through what we include and what we exclude, even if we never say a thing about it. And that is all tied up with the conventions that make up our program. This is why it makes sense to take stock of those conventions and also to ask ourselves, why these conventions and not others? The point here is we can make different kinds of decisions to have more inclusive, more robust, more expansive programs, but that might mean changing up some of our conventions.
We could change it. We're open to anything.
All of this goes back to the idea of being flexible and adaptive. So this is the point where people often get frustrated and kind of throw their hands up in the air and are like,
what am I supposed to do?
This is a moment where we can make change. This is a moment where we could be really flexible. So once you are aware of the conventions and can begin to think reflectively, you can figure out what you might be overemphasizing and what you might be excluding. And from here, you can seek out more expansive ways of knowing and doing music. So this might mean the next time you go to a workshop, you don't go to the kind of workshop that you typically go to. You go to something completely different. Maybe you go to a completely different conference. Maybe you get a different kind of resource. Maybe you bring different kinds of experts into your program. Maybe you chat up some musicians who engage in different kinds of ways. This is an opportunity to grow. This is an opportunity to expand. Is it possible to include students in these conversations?
Perhaps you can listen to the voices of the children.
I think it is. I think you could have these conversations if you scaffold them well and if you have gone through the process first and just were really honest with the students and just kind of transparent and say, hey, I was watching this YouTube video and, it encouraged me to think about the things that we typically do in our program. And I was wondering if I were to ask you, students in the program, what would you say are the most typical things that we do? You're going to find out so much from asking them that question. It may be the most important perspective that is part of this process. You might be asked to make some changes.
Are you ready for this?
I think you are. I think you're ready for it. Okay, so the cool thing about YouTube is that when you have the time to go through this process on your own or with some great colleagues of yours, some friends, go back through the video, pause it at the moments where I kind of outline what the step is, and then go through your own process. It would be fantastic if you could put your process in the comment section and then we can all learn with each other. That would be amazing. Obviously, you don't need to do that. It's up to you. Some of these things you might want to keep to yourself, but I think that this process is best done in community with other people.
Hack rule number 2. Listen to each other.
Let's be the team that supports each other.
Thank you for that constructive criticism.
It's an opportunity. It's a place to imagine possibilities of what could be. And that's sometimes scary, but think of the potential for flexibility and change. We're all in this together. Let me know in the comments, what conventions have you spotted in your program that you think need to stay and why, and what conventions do you think maybe might need to go and why? And come back for more videos to help us imagine possibilities and make them happen. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and all that if you like. Good luck with it. Let me know how it goes, and I'll see you next time.